Well, what my dad did in one of his early years, instead of going out alone, I think he did that a couple of times out to the Columbia Plateau in Washington. The third time he went out, I think it was, he decided to take the family along, make a family touring trip out of it, camping trip. And he equipped the car that we had at that time, which was a four-cylinder 1924 Dodge sedan. And we became a self-contained living unit, the four of us. My sister was 3 years younger than me. I was 10 at the time, she was 7. And Dad and I sat in the front seat. And mother and the daughter sat in the back seat. And we managed to cover maybe 300 miles a day on the way west. And it got to be routine. We did this at least 4 summers, maybe it was more, as a family, going along with him out to his geology work. Of course, we didn't go climbing up hills and across coulees and so forth with him. We generally stayed in the whatever tourist camp it was that we'd found. It was a nice place, especially if it was on a river or something where the kids could go swimming. And he and the students would go out during the day and come back in the evening. Sometimes we'd have campfires and that sort of thing. So it was great for us. It was a marvelous experience for kids of that age.
Did he talk to you about the geology and?
Very little. I don't think that at my age I was capable of understanding very much of the geology. He did talk about the flood. I knew that he was on the trail of a flood. I didn't understand it was something that had never occurred before in the history of the world. The drama of that situation escaped me. But I do remember asking him where the flood came from. And I guess that's the question that everybody was asking at that time. Where did the water come from? And I remember his saying it might have been this, that, or the other. It might have been a volcano erupting under the ice sheet. That much I can recall, having learned. In later years, I kind of wish that I had paid more attention to the thinking that he was doing. But because that was going on between him and the students he had with him. He always took students. I think that was part of the financial reality of the trip, that if the university could get a few tuitions, they could afford a substantial grant. By substantial, I mean maybe as much as $500, $600 for the summer. It would have to be, we would leave after school was out, June, and get back in time for his regular 1 month field trip in Wisconsin during the month of September. So it was a relatively short summer, but it was a lot of traveling at a time when traveling was not easy. I don't think there was a single paved road from coast to coast in 1924. That just was not heard of. They might have been gravel roads. The really good roads were gravel and scraped every week at least, maybe sometimes more often. But a lot of roads were only made of dirt, and when the rains came, they were really something. I can remember being stuck in the mud many times and being hauled out by a team of horses several times, I can recall, back in those days. I remember one time somewhere in the southwest near Mesa Verde Park, there was a flash flood or a flash rain, a sudden shower that had wet the top of the dirt roads, made them very, very slippery. And here we were following a car along one of these slippery roads, and the road had to be graded so that it would drain off into ditches on either side. That was the way they kept these roads from washing away themselves. And here we were holding as best we could at the crown of this road. The fellow ahead of us the same. And around the corner, way down ahead, we see a car coming toward us, also hugging the top of the crest of the road. And there was no possibility that we could get by each other without each going off to the side. So that's what happened. The fellow in front of us went off to the right, the fellow coming went off on his side, and they each kept going off. So they both landed up in the ditch, and we sailed straight through on the top of the crest. Well, that's the kind of traveling you have to do. They were always building, always tearing something up, building something new, and dust, and bumps, and detours. Every day there, half the time you're on some kind of crazy detour. It took you on some back road, or it took you on some temporary road to a farmer's pasture, or something of this kind. He was a geologist, and he had been living in Seattle, and he had done his geological work for his PhD on the geology of the Puget Sound area, which was a contribution, I understand, lasted a great many years, and was built on as one of the basic geological works of that era. He taught at the high school there first in Seattle, and then he went to the University of Seattle and taught there, and that was about the time that I came along. And then he went to the University of Chicago to get his degree, and then was asked to join the staff there. So he's been a geologist all his life.
What are you going about?
Well, I talked just now about 1924, 5, 6, 7, those years.
Uh-huh.
And those trips, of course, we were established in Chicago, and he was on the staff at the University of Chicago at that time. And so he took us as a family along with him for his summer work. But we didn't go back to live in Seattle at all.
Where did you live?
We lived in Chicago,
Okay.
a section of Chicago, and then we moved to a suburb called Homewood to the southwest of Chicago on the Illinois Central Railroad.
Can you just talk about your dad generally? You know, what sort of person, I mean, in his professional life, was he a prickly sort of person? Was he difficult to get along with, or did he,
He scared his students to death. Some of them. If you had it, you got along with him fine. If you didn't have it, you were in real trouble. Because he had a way of teaching which has been described as Socratic. That is, by asking questions rather than he never stood up and lectured and gave information. He didn't feel that was a good use of his time in front of the class. He had the class use the medium of the book and read the book prior to class, and then he spent his time in class discussing it and getting the students to discuss it back and forth. He'd ask a question, he'd get an answer, and then he'd ask if anybody disagreed with the answer, and he'd get an argument going in class, and he had everybody paying attention. If he didn't have them paying attention, they were in trouble. One student told me he'd never forget the time that my dad caught him looking out the window. So sort of like the professor that, the apocryphal professor who lectured away and lectured out a question and then stopped and walked down the aisle and pointed his finger and said, he would be delighted to catch somebody who didn't know the answer to a question and tease it out of him in some way so that the guy would make a stupid mistake or say something which was ridiculous and point out, or get someone else to point out how ridiculous it was. And then he would hold that over that student for the rest of the class, of the course. And poor student, every time the subject would come up, he would say, well, Mr. So-and-so would say this, and give a crazy answer, which would get a laugh. And he would milk that for all it was worth. And the result was that if you had it, if you knew what you're talking about, you would get along just fine. And if you didn't know, you were in terrible trouble. And there were people who quit the class. There were students who just couldn't take it. There were ridiculed. Sarcasm was his greatest weapon. But those who managed to survive were ones that sang his praises forever. And I heard so much about what a tremendous teacher he was, and how inspiring he was, and how much you could learn by talking with him, or listening in his classes and being a part of it, that I decided I would have to take one of his courses. So I signed up for historical geology. And I started out on one side of this thing, where I didn't know something one time, and I said I saw myself getting into real trouble. And of course he was probably leaning over a little backwards because I was his own son. He wasn't have anybody say that he was being partial in any way. So I was lucky that I had a free period just before his class, and I got that book, and I read that book so thoroughly. The portion that is going to be discussed each day, I was right fresh on, and I knew exactly what I would be talking about. I managed to get through it all right with a decent grade, but it was an experience that I'm very glad I had. I don't remember him being away from home evenings very much. Probably he was. Of course, being away all summer, those summers when he went out without the family, that sort of broke us up. It was good if he took his family along on these trips. But I don't remember being apart from them a great deal. It seems that the family is always pretty close-knit. And he always took a great interest in whatever I was interested in. I was the biologist. When I was in high school, I was the biologist. I was the school biologist at that time, and he supported that. And then later on, when he was having his troubles with the controversy over his explanation of what he found in the Pacific Northwest on the Columbia Plateau, he went through a lot of difficulty because he was being ridiculed and vilified and everything else. And at that particular time, I was in a point where I was kind of trying to break away from him and rebel against the father figure and all this kind of thing. And I'm afraid that made things even harder for him. I also at that time turned around and left the field of science. He had hoped that I would become a scientist of some kind. And I had gotten into zoology, and then I decided to make that practical and go in to take the pre-medic courses, which I did, and I was practically ready to go into med school, and decided against that and turned around and went to art school instead. And that was terrible shock to him, that I would go into something as different from what he had expected for me. But as soon as I got doing things, and especially as soon as I started writing books about it, that whole attitude changed. So he wasn't an easy father to have, but he was a very loving father and very supportive. And eventually, I think we became as close as we've ever been. I don't know what this has to do with the scabland floods.
Oh, everything relates. You know, everything relates in the world, right? So, do you know anything about that period?
Oh yes, that period from the early 30s on was a period where he went into quite a depression for a couple of years. Then he came out of it, and he went into some wholly different areas. The reason, of course, was that there had been such opposition to his ideas. He had come on something which no geologist had encountered before, and nobody really believed his explanation that there was this flood. He had in mind a single flood. Didn't realize that there could have been repeated floods. And his idea that this all of these landforms in central Washington were caused by a tremendous amount of water flowing over a very short period of time. It was like nothing that anybody had ever encountered in geology before. And therefore, it must have been a mistake, must have been something wrong. And everyone took the point of view, especially the USGS, the U.S. Geological Survey, and people who were established as authorities in the field of geology, believed that geological processes took great amount of time and were gradual over millennia, and that nothing could happen in a few days or a few weeks that would move as much rock and gravel and sand and so forth as was moved across the state of Washington by that flood that he had discovered. So they said you couldn't possibly have discovered a flood that did all this in that short a time. And it was he was the subject of ridicule. So it depressed him very much, and he eventually had a chance to go on an expedition to Greenland, summer of 1933. And he came back from that experience, his first time abroad, quite a new man. He went into the origin of caves. He'd been working for the Missouri Geological Survey, I believe, and they have many, many caves in Missouri, and he began investigating the origin of caves. He established some theories that have been basic in the understanding of cave formation during that period. And eventually, other geologists began going over the same areas. The Grand Coulee Dam had been built, and lots of new evidence was found that sort of supported the theories that he had about the Columbia Plateau. And he got back into it, cooperating with these other geologists who had done further work, and on the basis that his general idea of the huge flood was correct, although they found in later years that there were many, many floods, not just one.
Did your mother, his wife, participate in any of these adventures, any of this?
As a family, yes. Yeah. She was along. She generally carried along her painting equipment, and she did a lot of painting, a lot of paintings. But that really required some place that's settled where you're going to stay for a while, because if you're traveling, you can't be painting too. And especially if you're taking care of a family. The family vacation is a vacation for the father and the kids, but never for the wife. So she had her hands full getting supper every night and washing the breakfast dishes before we went going in again in the morning and all that sort of thing. He would try and leave us at some nice place. For example, we were up into Canada at one point. I think he was investigating what data he could find, what he could discover about the effects of the flood up into Canada, or maybe he was looking for the origins of the water at that time, up by Lake Okanagan, the Penticton, and those areas of Canada. And how he worked with the students. He had 3 or 4 students with him each summer trip, and what he did with the students was to incorporate them into his thinking, so that he was not trying to teach them anything, except as they would learn by observation. And he was allowing them to observe his thinking by incorporating them into it. In other words, he would say, what do you think of this? And this looks like that, and involve them in contributing to the thinking about what he saw. I also remember that his mode of operating was to spend the day in tramping over the countryside, climbing the particular hills where he needed to know he needed the data of observation. And then we would go and have dinner in some cafe, and after dinner we'd ask if we couldn't just stay there in the booth, and we'd sit down, clear the table, and spend an hour or two in the evening writing up notes. And that's at the point where he would write his field notes. And as soon as your field notes were finished, then we'd go have some rest, and the next morning start out fresh and wherever the investigation carried them. I remember one time in Coulee City we were staying. We were sleeping at Park Lake down by Dry Falls. Coulee City is about 12 miles out, and we were having dinner there. And he was writing his notes, and I was wanting to get home, get to bed, get back to camp, so to speak. So I said, well, I'll just start out walking, and I'll walk out there, and you can pick me up on the way when you get done. So he said, fine, and I walked down 12 miles, and during the 12 miles, there must have been 12 or 15 cars passed me on the road. Every single one stopped and asked if I didn't want to ride. And I wasn't used to that, coming from the east. That was something that was particularly Western. At any rate, this was his way of operating in the field. Well, I can remember Dry Falls, of course, a vivid picture of that. I could imagine a waterfall. I imagined the Columbia River coming down through there and going over those falls and cutting the falls back gradually, making that channel down below and so forth, like any standard waterfall. And I certainly recall the coulees where the basalt rock, the lava rock, was dug out, and there was nothing in the way of soil of any kind, just chunks of small mesas, actually. They called it scabland because the land looked like it had scabs on it, this rock sticking up everywhere. Yeah, I can remember all that quite vividly. I remember looking on the map one time, and there was one area where it was owned by a family called Drumheller. And I remember saying, my goodness, look at this map, the Drumheller owns all kinds of land down here. And my dad said, no, just one kind. Scabland. The Park Lake stands out in my memory because we slept on the end of a dock, really out over the lake, and it was cool there. That was a very hot area of the world at that time of year. And so those evenings, I can remember one very important thing was there was a place to get orange drink, bottled orange drink. And that stands out in my memory as being an important thing in those days.
I don't know if it's I don't excited for science. That's a term that's applied when you climb up a gully. You mean a sharp thing up a mountain. When you mountain climbing, you climb up a couloir.
I always called it couloir.
Yeah,
but
that's the same word he's trying to...
Couloir, but then I was out shooting a ski thing a couple weeks ago, and I said something like, put the other camera down at the bottom of the couloir, and they're going, what? What? Yeah, and they say, right. With writing so cogently, expressively.
Yeah. He certainly had the ability. I don't know whether it was good management or talent. Probably a lot of talent involved there. I don't remember his ever discussing his writing. He wrote and we read, and it was great. What I did notice in some of his writing was that he had a tendency to treat the reader much as he would have treated a student in class. That is, challenging him, asking him to think about something. Even in one case, I remember, he states in the book, now close the book and answer this question before you read on. Oh, that I thought was something that I'd never encountered in a book before. Yet it is the basis of program instruction, where the student is actuated to do something, and until he does it, he doesn't take the next step. Dad had unconsciously conceived of that way of cutting across the point, teaching something to someone by activating the person. You don't teach something, you help the fellow learn something, which is what he was doing all his life. Albion College in Michigan. And he was very much interested in going into the ministry. And he was active in many kinds of religious activities. And I think what dissuaded him from that direction was he took a course in science given at that college by a very inspiring instructor. And he began to see that what one learns by direct observation of nature is not the same as what has been revealed in the scriptures. And that caused him to do a lot of thinking. I have a very interesting exhibit, which I asked for particularly, and he gave to me before he died, which was his personal Bible. And I had heard that he had, at that time, sort of separated himself from the dogma of religion, and signified that separation by taking his penknife and cutting the word holy out of the front page of the Bible. I find that he did change that, but he didn't actually cut out the Bible. He simply pasted it over, and he described it in different terms. I've got it. I'd have to get it and read it. It's worth reading. Turn it off. Let me go get it now. Read what he said. Well, I've got in my hand here his original personal Bible that he was supposed to have cut the word holy out of. He didn't actually cut it out. He pasted something over it so that he didn't actually damage the Bible. But he did change the wording slightly on the front of the frontispiece, or the title page of the Bible. The word holy does not appear. Instead, it says heterogeneous collection of Hebrew, Greek, and cosmopolitan books known as and the word Bible appears as originally. And he added, and treasured by Orthodox believers in the religion of Christ, and containing a complete and infallible revelation of the will of their monotheistic deity towards Homo sapiens. I read that badly. I should be able to read it more smoothly than that. But that's really something. That's the title. That is his replacement for the two words Holy Bible. That's right. That's right. And he didn't actually deface the Bible page. He didn't cut it out as I was told he did.
That's I should get a shot at that.
Yeah, oh, you should. This is great. That's
yeah. Let me.
Well, this looks like a high school group.
Well, it's got a date here. They're both the same. It's the first April 25, 1914.
Right.
So that would have,
River trip. Where's the Green River?
that's south of Seattle.
I see.
But 1914, this would be when he's at UW, right?
It must have been. Had to be.
So that'd been a UW trip, perhaps.
Right. Well, these kids look young, and these kids look more mature. It's,
What, do you think he still would have had high school kids in that?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Have you ever seen this photograph before, Rudy? Or
You know, this is
This one?
yeah,
all male.
I just saw it for the first time
All males.
a few days ago.
Oh, look
See,
at this. There's a, right here, there's a geology hammer stood up next to the stool.
what is it? A geology what?
It's a geology pick. That's one of these things, clearly a geology stone pick.
See, these things came out of a lot of materials that I inherited in 1981 when he died. Put them all into a steamer trunk, not a steamer, but a footlocker trunk.
Yeah, right.
And I had a couple of those, and they're loaded. And I haven't got to them. For 10 years they've been sitting in the garage. And this stimulated me to dig those things out and see what pictures of them I could find.
Yeah.
When I get the light, it's the right way, I can see the thing.
Yeah.
Like this one we. Actually, well, before you get to this one, like this.
Yeah, especially these.
Those two. Well, this looks like a trip of some sort. That might be. This is, maybe there's not too much to say about that. It's labeled.
Yeah.
This, I think. You said something about the tent the other day. It was interesting to you.
Yeah, I've got the tent, the actual tent.
You know, I think these things that are good images of him. But this.
I don't know what I can say about it now.
Okay, but I mean, just if they're not labeled in time.
Well, these are professional photographs made by a local photographer in the small town of Saranac, where he grew up. You can see him here at the age of 4 or 5, standing here. I can't tell what you're on. Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
And his younger sister, the first of 3 sisters. He had 1 brother and 3 sisters. And with his father and mother there. Here he is with his sister. He was about, that was Bina. And he was about 11 or so at that time.
Is Saranac up in the upper Michigan?
No, south. It's very close to Grand Rapids.
Okay.
It's kind of east of Grand Rapids, I believe.
Okay.
And that's the big apple to go to when you're living in a little town like Saranac. This is him at college age. I guess he was a freshman or sophomore at this time. It was taken in 1900. According to his identification, it's on the back there, in his handwriting. He identifies it as that year. Do you want to look at these? No, it's just
Sure.
a picture of him. I'll turn it around. Yeah, here he is in college days. This is a group of people which are interested in foreign missions. Student Volunteer Band for Foreign Missions, it's called. He was very seriously interested in becoming a missionary, or at least a minister, before he lost his religion. And there's some other pictures of him about the age of 20. He was going to the first great sea change in his life. Well, about that time when he rejected Christianity, rejected religion.
Well, the religious life.
Yeah, from his life entirely. Became a very outspoken atheist, and anti-Christian and so forth, with the result that I had no religious training as a youth, and I haven't had to be worried about religion since. It hasn't been important to me ever, nor will it ever be. But I don't call myself a militant atheist at all.
They were
And in this one, he's seen with 4 siblings, 3 sisters and his brother. And over here, this is an interesting one. This is one of his first visits to Washington, state of Washington.
well, now when did this occur?
1922, I would place that.
Uh-huh.
And this is the car. It's an old Model T Ford. I don't know what year, but you can probably identify it by the peculiar window at the back, 3 vertical panels of isinglass in that collapsible top. 3 students and a young Doc Bretz with his perennial pipe.
I'm surprised that Dad would smoke.
Yeah. Well, he never really did inhale, so he didn't really, I think, ever show any bad results of smoking. Didn't have any lung problems of any sort. Here he is in this position. This is a group photo of the faculty, the Geology Department at the University of Chicago in 1928. 25, sorry, rather wrong, 1925. And around here, a group of students at the Malibu field course, Devils Lake, Wisconsin, which he gave every year for about 10 or 15 years. And over here, very famous picture. He, I don't know under what conditions, but he once captioned it, 5 great men in one picture. And then vaguely back here you see Mount Rushmore. He called it 5 great men in one picture, 4 of them don't show.
Yeah, it's very good.
This he captioned himself, Father Marquette. And there he is in his pajamas, scratching his head, and he's overlooking some place in the east, I guess, in the Appalachians somewhere. There's a big lot of water and some kind of a railroad trestle through. I have no idea where it is. Now this one over here, Bretzville, I have no idea where Bretzville is. I can't find it in my atlas.
You think he just had the sign made up or something?
No. They drove by and there was a town by that name. Doesn't look like much of a town. It's 1 barn and 1 house, 1 shack. I've always visited it.
It's in Ohio, isn't it?
Either Ohio or Indiana. I'm not sure exactly which. But it's not in my atlas. And I've got the National Geographic, and I've got the Life magazine, I've got the International Land McNally Atlas, and none of them say anything about a Bretzville.